I think it's great to be a player, and you want to play against Leeds every week. You want to play against it because you've got to be at your best.
At 75 years old, Alan Hudson is still living with a question that football never properly answered. What really happened? How does a player with his talent end up with only 2 England caps? How does a midfielder praised by teammates, opponents and supporters become one of football's greatest what if? For decades that question has never gone away, and neither has the regret that came with it. Alan Hudson had vision, confidence, imagination, the kind of ability that could change a match in a single moment. When England finally gave him a chance, he looked like he belonged there, but almost as quickly as he arrived, he was gone. 2 caps, just 2. For most players that would be a dream fulfilled. For Alan Hudson, it became a reminder of what might have been, because this was never a player who lacked talent. It was a player football never fully understood. And as the years passed, that unanswered question followed him through triumph, heartbreak, illness and tragedy. A question that still lingers today. What if England had trusted Alan Hudson a little longer? The answer begins long before the England story. Subscribe and join us as we revisit the players who helped shape football's golden age. Alan Hudson was born on June 20 1951 in Chelsea, London. For him, Chelsea was never just a football club. It was home. He grew up only a short distance from Stamford Bridge. As a boy, he dreamed of wearing the blue shirt. And before long, that dream became reality. Hudson's joined Chelsea as a youngster and quickly stood out. Not because of his strength, not because of his speed, but because of the way he saw the game. He played with confidence, vision and imagination. The ball seemed to obey him. While others rushed, Hudson stayed calm. He always looked one step ahead. As he climbed through the ranks, Chelsea supporters began to notice something special. This local boy had real talent. The kind of talent that could change a game with a single pass. Soon he found himself playing alongside stars like Peter Osgood and Charlie Cook. Chelsea were one of England's most exciting teams, and Hudson looked perfectly at home. Fans loved his creativity, his bravery on the ball, and his willingness to try things others wouldn't. Everything pointed toward a bright future, but football can be cruel. And just as Chelsea prepared for one of the biggest moments in their history, Alan Hudson's first great heartbreak arrived, one that would stay with him for years. By 1970, Chelsea were on the verge of history. The club had reached the FA Cup final. For Alan Hudson, it should have been the biggest day of his young career. But football had other plans. An injury ruled him out. While his teammates prepared for the final, Hudson could only watch. For a local Chelsea boy, it was heartbreaking. The dream was right in front of him, yet he could not be part of it. Chelsea went on to defeat Leeds United and lift the trophy. The celebrations were unforgettable. But for Hudson, there was always one painful thought. What if he had been out there too? It was an early lesson. Talent alone does not guarantee your moment. Sometimes football takes it away. Still, Hudson refused to let disappointment define him, because an even bigger opportunity was waiting just around the corner, and this time he would not be watching from the sidelines. If missing the FA Cup final was a heartbreak, the following year brought redemption. Chelsea were chasing European glory, and this time Alan Hudson was right at the heart of the team. The stage was bigger, the pressure was greater, but Hudson looked completely at ease. He played with the same confidence that had made supporters believe in him from the beginning. The same vision, the same creativity, the same belief. Chelsea eventually lifted the European Cup Winners' Cup, one of the greatest achievements in the club's history. And unlike the FA Cup final, Hudson was part of the journey all the way. For many supporters, it felt like the beginning of something special. A young midfielder with enormous talent, a European trophy already in his hands, and his best years still ahead of him. Everything seemed possible. But football careers rarely follow the path people expect, because despite the success, changes were already beginning behind the scenes. And before long, Hudson would find himself leaving the club he had always called home. Leaving Chelsea was not easy. It was the club he loved, the club he had grown up supporting, but sometimes a fresh start changes everything. For Alan Hudson, that fresh start came at Stoke City, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions of his career. At Stoke, he was trusted, given freedom, given responsibility, and most importantly, given the chance to play his game. Hudson flourished. Week after week, he showed the quality that so many people had always seen in him: his passing, his vision, his ability to control a match. Everything seemed to come together. Many supporters believe the finest football of his career came during his Stoke years. He became the heartbeat of a talented side, a team capable of troubling anyone on their day. For Hudson, it felt like a second chance, proof that his story was far from over. And as his performances improved, So did the calls for England to finally take notice. The question was becoming impossible to ignore. If Alan Hudson was this good, why wasn't he playing for his country? Eventually, England would give him an answer, but it was an answer that would leave football fans arguing for decades. In 1975, Alan Hudson finally got his chance. England called. At last, for years, supporters had believed he deserved it. Now he had the opportunity to prove them right. His debut came against West Germany, the reigning world champions, a stage that would intimidate most players. Not Hudson. He looked calm, confident, composed, exactly as he always had. Many felt he was one of England's best players that day. The praise arrived quickly. Some even believed England had finally found the creative midfielder they had been searching for. It should have been the beginning. Instead, it was almost the end. Just weeks later, Hudson's England career was over. 2 caps, that was all he would ever receive. For supporters, it made no sense. How could a player admired for his vision and ability disappear so quickly? It became one of football's great mysteries, and for Hudson, one of football's greatest disappointments, because no matter how much time passed, the feeling never truly left him. The feeling that England had given up on him before he had been given a real chance. After England, the future still looked bright. Alan Hudson was in his prime, and many believed his best years were still ahead of him. But football can change quickly. The momentum that had carried him through his Stoke years slowly began to fade. A move to Arsenal promised a new chapter. Instead, it never fully worked out. The magic was still there, but the consistency was not. Injuries started taking their toll. Opportunities became harder to find, and the career that once seemed destined for greatness began drifting in a different direction. Hudson would continue playing. He would continue fighting, but the excitement that once surrounded his name was slowly disappearing. The player many believed could become one of England's finest midfielders was now becoming one of football's biggest what-ifs. And as the years passed, a new challenge appeared. Life after football, a challenge that would prove far tougher than anything he faced on the pitch. Retirement brought its own challenges, but nothing could prepare Alan Hudson for what came next. In 1997, his life changed forever. A serious road accident left him fighting for survival. The injuries were devastating. For a time, his future was uncertain. The recovery was long, painful, and filled with setbacks. The man who once glided across football pitches now faced a very different battle. Simple things became difficult. Everyday tasks became challenges. And the effects of the accident never truly disappeared. The physical pain was only part of it. The years that followed brought financial struggles, health problems, and difficult periods that tested him more than any football match ever could. Later came another battle, cancer. Yet somehow Hudson kept going. He kept fighting. He kept surviving. But the life he had known as a footballer was gone. And through it all, one question still remained. What might have happened if things had turned out differently? Today, Alan Hudson's story still leaves people asking the same question. What might have been? Not because he lacked talent. Quite the opposite. Many who watched him believed he was one of the most gifted midfielders of his generation. A player who saw football differently. A player who made difficult things look simple. Even decades later, the disappointment of his England career never completely disappeared. The hurt remained. The feeling that 2 caps could never tell the full story, because Alan Hudson was more than a statistic, more than a number in a record book. He was a football artist, one who many believed deserved far more opportunities than he received. The tragedies that followed only made the story still more painful. The accident, the health battles, the financial struggles, the years spent fighting challenges that most supporters never saw. Yet through it all, Hudson survived, and he never stopped speaking his mind, never stopped defending his ability, never stopped believing in the player he once was. Perhaps that is why his story still matters today, because football fans understand that greatness is not always measured by medals. Sometimes it is measured by memories, and those who saw Alan Hudson at his best have never forgotten him. They remember the vision, the confidence, the elegance, and they remember the question football never properly answered. What if England had trusted him longer? What if fate had been kinder? What if one of football's most gifted talents had received the opportunities his ability deserved? We will never know, but one thing is certain. Alan Hudson was far more than 2 England caps, and far more than football's greatest what if. He was one of the game's forgotten artists, a man whose talent was admired by legends, and whose story deserves to be remembered. Some players leave behind trophies, others leave behind questions. Alan Hudson left both. If Alan Hudson's story brought back memories of football's golden age, subscribe and join us for more journeys into the lives of the game's true legends.